In the mid-1600s, Rome had a problem. Wealthy men were dying at a disturbing rate, healthy one week, feverish and bedridden the next. No wounds, no obvious cause, just a slow, inexorable deterioration that baffled the city's physicians. The doctors called it fever. They called it bad air. They called it God's will. It wasn't. In the cramped back streets of Rome, a woman named Giulia Tofana had built something extraordinary, a secret network that stretched across the city, run almost entirely by women, with a single purpose: to help wives escape marriages they couldn't legally leave. Her method was a colorless, odorless, tasteless liquid she called Aqua Tofana. 4 drops. That's all it took. And by the time the Roman Inquisition caught up with her, she was believed to have helped kill more than 600 men. To understand Giulia Tofana, you have to understand what marriage meant for a woman in 17th century Italy. It wasn't a partnership. It was a transfer of ownership. A woman had no right to divorce her husband, no right to own property independently, no right to refuse her husband's demands, physical, financial, or otherwise. The church considered marriage permanent and inviolable. Civil law gave a husband near total authority over his wife's body, finances, and movements. If your husband beat you, that was a private matter. If he gambled away the family's money, that was his prerogative. If he was cruel, unfaithful, or simply dangerous, your options were essentially non-existent. You could pray. You could endure. Or, if you knew the right people, you could seek out Giulia Tofana. Giulia likely learned her craft from her mother, Tofania d'Adamo, who was executed in Palermo in 1633, possibly for poisoning her own husband. The art of slow, undetectable poisoning was a generational inheritance passed down through a culture where women had almost no other power. When Giulia eventually set up her operation in Rome, she wasn't just selling poison, she was selling a way out. The poison itself was Giulia's masterpiece. Aqua Tofana, water of Tofana, was a solution primarily composed of arsenic trioxide, sometimes combined with lead and belladonna. The exact formulation died with her, but historians and toxicologists have reconstructed its likely properties from the patterns of death it caused. It was colorless. It had no detectable taste or smell. A small amount could be mixed into wine, water, or food without any sign. And crucially, it worked slowly. A full, lethal dose, administered in small increments over days or weeks, produced symptoms almost indistinguishable from natural illness. First came weakness and fatigue, then fever, then progressive organ failure. Physicians examining the victims found nothing they could point to with certainty. The victim looked like he was simply sick. Giulia sold the poison disguised as a cosmetic, packaged in small vials labeled as a devotional oil of Saint Nicholas of Bari, a common product sold openly at the time. The devout women who purchased it for their devotions were exchanging exactly the kind of goods a woman might reasonably carry. Nobody looked twice. The operation was a masterwork of concealment, hiding in plain sight, embedded in the ordinary religious commerce of Catholic Rome. Giulia didn't work alone. At its peak, her network involved dozens of women, distributors, intermediaries, and a figure known as Girolamo Spana, who helped run the Rome operation and would eventually carry it on after Giulia's arrest. The clients were, by most accounts, women with serious grievances. Most were not casual murderers. They were women trapped in violent marriages, women whose husbands were destroying their families, women who had no legal recourse and saw no other way out. The network operated through careful vetting. You didn't just walk up to Giulia Tofana and ask for poison. You were referred by someone who trusted you, someone who had used the service themselves or knew someone who had. Trust was the only security the operation possessed, and for decades it held. Contemporary accounts suggest Giulia operated successfully for roughly 20 years before suspicion began to close in. 20 years, hundreds of customers, and no confirmed arrests. a testament to how thoroughly her operation was embedded in the social fabric of Rome, and how little appetite the authorities had for looking too closely at dead husbands. The story of how Giulia Tofana was finally caught depends on which source you believe. The most dramatic account holds that one of her clients lost her nerve at the last moment. About to administer a dose to her husband's soup, she stopped and confessed to a priest. The priest, bound by canon law to report threats to human life, informed the civil authorities. Whether this is precisely how it happened is uncertain. What's clear is that by the early 1650s, the Roman Inquisition had begun to hear consistent rumors about a network of poisonings connected to a woman named Giulia Tofana. When the investigation began, Giulia fled to a convent and claimed sanctuary, a legal protection that, for a time, the church actually upheld. For weeks, she sheltered there, untouchable, while the authorities pressured church officials to hand her over. Eventually, a rumor was spread, almost certainly deliberately, that Giulia had poisoned Rome's water supply. The resulting public panic gave the authorities the justification they needed to extract her from sanctuary. She was arrested. Under torture, she confessed. The numbers that emerged were staggering. Over 600 victims, spanning roughly 2 decades. Giulia Tofana was executed in Rome in 1659, along with several of her associates, including Girolamo Spana. The records of the trial were sealed by the Catholic Church. Giulia Tofana's story didn't end with her execution. Aqua Tofana continued to circulate in Europe for decades after her death. The name became so notorious it became a catch-all term for any slow-acting poison of uncertain composition. The most famous alleged victim came nearly a century later. In 1791, Mozart fell gravely ill and died. In his final months, he reportedly became convinced he had been poisoned, and one of the substances named by contemporaries and historians over the centuries was Aqua Tofana. Almost certainly false. But the persistence of the legend tells you something about how deeply the fear of this invisible, untraceable death had embedded itself in the European imagination. Were Giulia Tofana's clients murderers? By law, yes, unambiguously. But the women who came to her weren't doing so out of greed. They were trapped in a legal system that gave them no other option. The law that imprisoned them was written by men, enforced by men, and designed to protect men's property, which is what wives legally were. Giulia Tofana didn't just sell poison, she sold agency. And that, more than anything else, is probably why the church sealed those trial records. She was executed in Rome in 1659. The records were sealed. And for nearly 4 centuries, the women who sought her out have had no names, no faces, and no story. History tends to record what power wants remembered. This was one of the things it didn't. If you made it this far, you clearly love the history that actually happened and is somehow more disturbing than anything fiction could invent. Subscribe. We do this every week.